A German shepherd, left to die in a swamp, abandoned and alone, his body sinking into the cold, murky water. No one knew how he ended up there, but everyone thought he was beyond saving. But then, a man appeared. He didn't turn away. He didn't hesitate. And what happened next? It's a story that will leave you breathless and tear at your heartstrings. Stay with us, because this rescue isn't just about saving a dog. It's about finding hope in the most unlikely places. The swamp was suffocating. The dark, murky water clung to everything in its path, swallowing any signs of life that dared to venture too far. Thick mud, tangled roots, and stagnant water made it nearly impossible to move, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. It was the kind of place that could easily claim the life of anyone who didn't belong. And there, lying in the muck, was a German shepherd. Liam Parker, a man who had lived most of his life in isolation, had only been out on his usual evening walk because he needed a break from the monotony of his small cabin. His boots sank deep into the muddy path as he made his way along the perimeter of the swamp. The rain from earlier had stopped, but the air still held a heavy moisture that clung to his skin. He wasn't expecting to find anything out of the ordinary until he saw the dog. At first, he thought it was just another stray wandering the area, looking for scraps of food. But then, as the dog's outline came into clearer view, something in Liam's chest tightened. The dog wasn't moving. It was half submerged in the swamp, its fur soaked and clumped together in thick, matted patches. Its body was covered in mud, and it was lying still, its face barely visible under the water. Liam's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a stray. This was something else. He rushed toward the dog, every step feeling like it could be his last in the treacherous swamp. Liam reached out, pulling the dog's lifeless form into his arms, feeling the weight of the animal's thin, fragile body. It was like pulling a lifeless rag doll from the muck. The German shepherd's fur was cold, drenched, and his body was stiff with exhaustion. There was no sign of movement, no signs of life at all. Liam's mind raced. He had to do something. The dog wasn't just a pet. It was someone's companion. How had it ended up here, abandoned in the depths of the swamp, as if left to die? Liam took a deep breath and turned back toward his cabin. He knew the swamp well, but getting through it with a dog in his arms was a challenge. Every step was heavier, more desperate. As Liam stumbled out of the swamp and back into the dry land, he noticed something odd. The dog wasn't fully unresponsive. His eyes flickered, the faintest spark of awareness just barely visible beneath the clouded, glazed surface. Liam's heart pounded harder. By the time Liam reached his cabin, the dog had slipped back into unconsciousness. Liam gently placed him on a blanket near the fireplace, doing his best to dry him off and warm him up. He had no idea what had happened to the dog, but he knew one thing for sure. This dog wasn't dead yet. Minutes turned into hours as Liam tried to tend to the dog's wounds, checking for any signs of broken bones or infections. His breathing was slow, shallow, but it was there. As the night wore on, Liam began to wonder, was the dog abandoned, or had something worse happened? The thought gnawed at him, but for now, he just focused on keeping the dog alive. He could ask questions later, when the dog was strong enough to answer. The next morning, when sunlight finally poured into the cabin, Liam was still by the dog's side. He hadn't left. He didn't know what he was hoping for, but there was something about this dog that spoke to him. Something deep, something familiar. He wasn't going to let this animal slip away. Not on his watch. When the dog's eyes fluttered open, Liam couldn't hold back a smile. It wasn't much, a faint flicker of recognition. But it was enough. The dog was alive. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension. Liam sat by the fire, his hands trembling slightly as he applied a cloth soaked in warm water to the German shepherd's side. Axel, as Liam had started calling him, lay motionless on the blanket, his body still too weak to even twitch. The day had barely begun, and yet it already felt like a lifetime. Liam wasn't a vet. He had no real medical training beyond basic first aid, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Axel needed him, and that was all that mattered. The night had been long and quiet. Axel had stayed unconscious for most of it, his breath coming in shallow, labored gasps. Liam had kept the fire going, watching the dog closely, hoping for any signs of improvement. But as the sun rose, Axel still hadn't moved. Is he going to make it? Liam wondered as he gently touched Axel's fur, feeling the coldness still clinging to his body. The dog's ribs were still visible, a stark reminder of how much weight he had lost. His fur was matted and stiff from the swamp, but beneath the dirt, Liam could feel the bones of a once strong dog. Liam's thoughts were interrupted by a soft whimper. It was barely audible, but enough to make his heart skip. Axel's eyes fluttered open again, just a crack at first, then wider. His gaze was unfocused, blurry, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of awareness. Liam's breath caught in his throat. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered, brushing a few strands of fur out of Axel's face. "You're okay. You're safe now." The German Shepherd's head shifted slightly, his chest rising and falling with effort. But even with the small movement, Liam felt a spark of hope. Axel wasn't completely gone. He was fighting. The next few hours were a blur of action. Liam got to work, gathering anything he thought might help. He had some leftover antibiotics from an old fishing trip, and he used what he could to clean Axel's wounds. The dog didn't flinch as Liam worked, but Liam could tell he was still in pain. "Just hang on a little longer," Liam said, his voice low but filled with determination. By the time the evening rolled around, Axel's condition had improved just enough for Liam to breathe a little easier. His breathing was steadier now, and he was even able to lift his head a few inches off the ground. Liam made a makeshift bed for himself beside Axel, deciding to stay by his side until the dog was fully awake. As he settled down on the couch, watching Axel with a vigilant gaze, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had found this dog half dead in the swamp, and now he couldn't help but wonder, why had Axel been there? Liam had his suspicions. Something wasn't right about the situation. It didn't make sense that a dog as strong as Axel had ended up abandoned in the swamp like that. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement. Axel's head lifted, and he let out another soft whimper. Liam immediately knelt beside him. "Hey buddy, how are you feeling?" he asked, stroking the dog's head gently. To Liam's surprise, Axel nuzzled his hand, his tongue flicking out to lick Liam's fingers. Liam smiled for the first time that day. "There you are," he whispered. Axel's eyes were still clouded, but there was something there now, a sign of life. Liam knew they still had a long way to go, but Axel was beginning to show signs of real progress. As the evening wore on, Axel fell into a deep, restful sleep. Liam finally allowed himself to relax, leaning back against the couch, but his mind kept racing. Why had Axel been out there? What kind of life had he lived before being abandoned in the swamp? Liam couldn't help but feel that there was more to Axel's story, something deeper than he could ever have imagined. The dog had been through so much already, but he was still here, still fighting. And Liam wasn't about to let him down. Liam woke up to the faintest sound, the sound of a soft whimper. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to break the silence in the cabin. He blinked, groggy from sleep, and immediately turned to check on Axel. The dog was lying in the same spot, his breathing still slow but steady. His eyes were closed, but there was something about the way his body moved. A tiny twitch of his paw that told Liam he was still fighting. Liam's heart skipped. He was alive. The past 2 days had been full of moments like this, small signs that Axel was getting better, yet never enough to give Liam the peace of mind he'd longed for. It was a waiting game, but every breath Axel took, every tiny improvement, felt like a victory. Liam stood up carefully, making sure not to disturb the dog, and walked over to the makeshift kitchen. He started preparing some food, trying to focus on the task at hand, but his mind kept returning to Axel. Axel had come so close to death. How had he ended up abandoned like that? Liam couldn't shake the question. He had to find out more about the dog's past. But first, he needed to ensure Axel would make it through the day. The survival instinct in the dog had already proven itself, but the next few days would be critical. By midday, Axel had shown some signs of improvement. His eyes were now partially open, his head lifting slightly when Liam spoke to him. There was still no response, but the fact that he could stay awake for longer periods was enough to fill Liam with a cautious optimism. Liam spent hours sitting beside Axel, gently stroking his fur and keeping him warm by the fire. As the day turned to evening, Axel's breathing seemed to slow down, and for a moment, Liam feared it was another setback. But Axel's tail, which had been motionless for the past couple of days, twitched. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Axel was showing signs of life. "Hey there, buddy," Liam whispered, leaning closer. "You're doing great. I can tell." Axel let out another small whimper, but this time there was more strength behind it. He shifted slightly, his head turning toward Liam's voice. His eyes locked with Liam's. Though still clouded, they seemed more focused. Liam's heart swelled with relief. Axel was no longer just a fragile dog clinging to life. He was fighting. But even with the progress, Liam knew they weren't out of the woods yet. There were still risks, infection, malnutrition, and the trauma of being abandoned that could turn the tide. That night, Liam lay beside Axel on the floor, his hand resting gently on the dog's side. The warmth of the fire and the quiet of the cabin brought a sense of calm, but the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on his chest. What would happen if Axel didn't make it? The thought lingered in Liam's mind, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to think like that. Axel needed him, and Liam was going to give him the best chance to survive. Around midnight, Axel stirred again. This time, he managed to raise his head higher, his ears flicking as he listened to the sounds around him. He let out a small groan, and then slowly, cautiously, shifted his body. Liam's heart skipped. Axel was moving on his own. "Good boy," Liam murmured, gently encouraging him. "You're doing amazing." The dog's body was weak, but there was an undeniable strength in his movements. Axel shifted a little more, then stopped, his head leaning against Liam's chest. It was clear now that he was beginning to trust again. Liam took a deep breath, looking down at Axel, and smiled softly. "You're not alone anymore. We've got this." The following days brought more progress, but Liam was constantly on edge. He knew that Axel still had a long road to recovery ahead of him. There would be setbacks, moments when the dog's health would worsen, and the fear of losing him would return. But for now, Liam focused on the victories. Axel was alive, and with each new day, Axel grew stronger. His eyes were clearer, his movements steadier. He was still thin and fragile, but the spark of life was there. The dog was fighting back, and Liam couldn't help but feel like he was fighting with him. Liam's confidence began to grow. The bond between him and Axel was deepening, and despite the challenges ahead, Liam knew one thing for sure: he was going to give this dog the life he deserved. Liam had thought the worst was behind them. Axel's health had been improving steadily. His breathing was no longer labored, and his body, though still frail, was beginning to regain some strength. For the first time in days, Liam dared to believe that maybe Axel would be okay. But then, Axel began doing something strange. It started with small things. In the mornings, when Liam would get up to start his day, Axel would look toward the door. Not with the usual confusion of a dog unsure of where he was, but with a focused, almost calculated expression, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. At first, Liam brushed it off as the dog getting used to his new surroundings, trying to make sense of what was happening. But then the behavior became more noticeable. One evening, as the sky darkened and the wind howled outside, Axel began pacing. Liam sat on the couch, watching Axel move back and forth across the room. The dog's eyes were locked on the door, his tail stiff and his ears angled forward, every muscle in his body tense. "Axel, what's wrong?" Liam asked softly. But the dog didn't respond. He kept pacing, his head moving in quick, sharp movements, as though listening for something. Liam got up slowly, walking toward the dog. Axel didn't flinch, but the air around him seemed thick with unease. Liam knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on Axel's back. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered. "We're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." But Axel's pacing didn't stop. He was still focused on the door. The next day, Liam decided to take Axel for a walk. Perhaps the dog just needed some fresh air. Or maybe he was feeling confined to the cabin. After all, being stuck in one place for so long could make anyone anxious. But as they walked through the woods near the cabin, Axel's behavior was unsettling. The dog moved cautiously, his ears constantly flicking in every direction. Liam watched as Axel paused near the edge of the woods, sniffing the air. For a moment, Axel was still, completely still. Liam stood behind him, waiting for him to move, but Axel didn't. His eyes were locked onto something far in the distance, as if he could sense something that Liam couldn't see. "Axel?" Liam called softly, but Axel didn't budge. His body was tense, his muscles coiled like a spring. It was then that Liam noticed something else. Just beyond the trees, in the farthest corner of the property, there was a broken fence. It was old and worn, and it hadn't been repaired in years. Liam knew it was there, but he never paid much attention to it. After all, there was no real reason to go beyond the fence. But Axel's reaction now made Liam uneasy. The dog had stopped sniffing the air, and was now staring at the broken fence, a low growl vibrating in his throat. Liam moved closer, kneeling down beside Axel. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Axel didn't respond. He continued to growl, a deep rumbling sound that came from deep in his chest. Liam's heart rate quickened. This wasn't normal. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Axel's strange behavior wasn't just anxiety. It felt like the dog was waiting for something, waiting for someone. Liam sat by the window, staring out at the woods, trying to make sense of it all. He couldn't figure out why Axel had become so fixated on the broken fence, or why he was so unnervingly alert. As the night settled in, Axel's behavior only grew more erratic. The pacing started again. This time, it wasn't just confined to the cabin. It was almost as if Axel was looking for something. Liam's eyes narrowed. What was Axel searching for? He stood up and grabbed a flashlight from the table, walking to the front door. Axel was still pacing, his eyes fixed on the shadows outside. "Come on, Axel," Liam called softly, but the dog didn't move. Liam stepped outside, the cold night air hitting his skin. He walked to the edge of the property, where the fence was, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the broken boards and overgrown weeds. But there was nothing unusual, nothing that explained Axel's odd behavior. Just as Liam was about to turn back, he heard it, a faint rustling noise coming from the trees. Axel's growl echoed through the still night air. Liam turned back to the cabin. Was someone out there? But as he looked around the property, there was nothing. The woods were silent again. Liam stood frozen, staring into the dark, wondering what Axel had sensed. Something had changed in the dog. There was more to Axel than just a stray. He wasn't a typical rescue dog. This dog had a past, and Liam was beginning to realize that he might not be able to protect him from whatever that past was. The following day, Liam couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled deep in his chest. Axel's behavior had become increasingly strange, and no matter how hard Liam tried to brush it off as just stress or anxiety from the trauma, he knew there was more to it. Axel wasn't just a lost dog looking for a home. He was acting like he was searching for something, waiting for something. But what? Liam's mind kept returning to the broken fence. Axel's reaction to it, the growl, the focus. It wasn't typical behavior for a dog who had been abandoned. It was as if Axel knew that the broken fence led somewhere important. That evening, after Axel had gone to sleep, Liam decided to do something he hadn't thought to do before. He searched the cabin. He'd already gone through Axel's fur, cleaning off the swamp water and dirt, but he hadn't searched the dog himself. Maybe there was something hidden, something that could explain the dog's strange behavior. As Liam sat beside Axel, he gently ran his fingers through the dog's fur, starting at the collar. The collar, though worn, didn't seem out of the ordinary. It had a simple metal tag with no name or number, just a serial number. Liam frowned. That was unusual. Most dogs had tags with their names and contact information. He turned the collar over, inspecting the tag more closely. It was a military tag. Liam's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a regular dog tag. It was issued for K9 units. Liam's heart began to race as he realized the implications. Could Axel have been a working dog? A police or military K9? It would explain his strange behavior, his training, the way he had been on high alert ever since Liam found him. But how did a dog like that end up abandoned in a swamp? The more Liam thought about it, the more questions piled up. He couldn't sit still any longer. He had to find answers. He had to know who Axel was before he could even think about giving him the life he deserved. Liam grabbed his phone and started searching. He found the serial number on the tag, doing his best to run a quick search online. It didn't take long before he found something that made his stomach drop. The name attached to the tag was Axel, the same name as the dog. But the real shock came when Liam read the rest of the information. Axel had been a canine unit dog for a small, local police department. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The department's records showed that Axel had been retired after a major incident, a drug bust gone wrong. Axel's handler had been killed, and Axel was pulled from active duty. However, the records were unclear after that point. The last update on Axel's status was a simple rehomed. Liam stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. Rehomed. But how had Axel ended up in the swamp? Why had he been abandoned? Liam's mind was racing. It wasn't just about the dog's past. It was about the fact that someone had let Axel go. They had discarded him after he had served and protected. After being a part of something much larger than Liam could have imagined. He had to find out who was responsible for this. Axel deserved better. That night, Liam stayed up late, researching everything he could about the local police department and its retired canines. The more he dug, the more he found that Axel wasn't the only dog to have been rehomed after the loss of their handler. Liam's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. Axel had been thrown away by the very people who should have cared for him. And now, those people might be looking for him. The next day, as Liam walked through the woods with Axel, the same eerie feeling came over him. The dog had stopped near the fence again, his eyes locked on the far end of the property, as if expecting someone. His tail was still, and his muscles were tensed. Liam followed Axel's gaze and looked toward the road that led to the town. Could someone be coming for him? "Don't worry, Axel," Liam whispered. "I'm not letting anyone take you." Axel let out a quiet growl, the tension in his body never breaking. It was clear. Axel knew something Liam didn't, and Liam was starting to wonder if that meant trouble was coming. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on them. He had always been a man who valued peace and solitude, but after uncovering the truth about Axel's past, everything changed. Axel wasn't just a dog. He was a living reminder of a world Liam had never known. A world of danger, secrecy, and betrayal. The fact that Axel had been discarded by the police department was one thing, but Liam now feared that Axel's past would catch up with them both. What if the people who had abandoned him came looking for him? What if Axel's service was far from over? The questions gnawed at Liam's mind. Who could he trust? And most importantly, who would come for Axel next? Liam tried to push the thoughts aside. He'd spent the better part of the morning preparing the cabin, reinforcing the door, checking the locks, and making sure everything was secure. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. Axel sat by the window, his eyes darting toward the trees every few minutes. The growls had stopped, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't just the dog's instincts at play. Axel knew something was coming. Liam paced the room, biting his lip. He needed answers. He couldn't protect Axel if he didn't know the full extent of the threat they were facing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Liam's phone rang. It was the same block number that had called him days ago, the one that had warned him about Axel's past. Logan's heart pounded in his chest as he picked up the phone. "Logan Pierce," came the cold voice on the other end. Liam didn't hesitate. "Who is this?" "We know you have him," the voice replied, barely hiding the menace beneath the calm tone. "We want him back." Liam's blood ran cold. "I'm not giving him to you. He's my dog now." The voice on the other end chuckled darkly. "You don't understand. Axel is part of something much bigger than you. He's not just any dog, and he's not yours to keep." Liam's stomach dropped. "Who are you? What do you want with him?" "We don't owe you an explanation," the voice said coldly. "We suggest you return Axel before it's too late." The line went dead. Liam stood there, frozen, his phone still pressed to his ear. He had just learned more than he ever wanted to know about Axel's past. Axel wasn't just a dog who had been abandoned by a heartless police department. There was something far darker at play here. Liam's hands shook as he hung up the phone. He didn't know what to do next. The people who wanted Axel didn't care about his safety, his well-being. They only cared about what they could use him for. Axel had been part of a system that Liam didn't understand. and now the dog was caught in the middle of something bigger than either of them. Liam wasn't ready to give up. He had made a promise to Axel the day he rescued him, that he wouldn't let anyone harm him again. But now, it seemed that promise might come with a cost. Liam's thoughts were interrupted by Axel's sudden movement. The dog stood up, his body trembling, his ears twitching. Axel's eyes were locked on the door. The same expression from days ago. The same sense of knowing that something was coming. Liam moved quickly toward him, kneeling down beside the dog. "What is it, Axel?" he asked. But the dog didn't respond. He didn't need to. Liam could feel the same sense of unease settling in his chest. The door suddenly creaked. Liam's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the wind. The door didn't move on its own. Something was outside. Liam grabbed the shotgun from under the couch and silently moved toward the door. Axel was now beside him, his body tense, his eyes sharp. Liam could hear his own breath, shallow and quick, but he didn't flinch. He wasn't going to let anyone take Axel. The knock came softly at first, a gentle tap, but it was enough to send a shiver down Liam's spine. Liam didn't answer. The knock came again. Axel let out a low growl. Liam slowly turned the knob, but before he could open the door, he heard a voice. "We know you're in there." Liam's breath caught in his throat. They were here. The knock echoed again, sharper this time. Liam's heart was pounding, his grip tightening on the shotgun. Axel was still by his side, his body tense, the low growl in his throat almost inaudible, but growing louder. Liam's eyes flicked toward the window. He could see nothing through the curtains, but he knew. They were out there. He could feel it. "Stay close, Axel," Liam whispered, his voice low but firm. He crouched down, checking the shotgun's chamber one last time, then slowly moved toward the door. Another knock came. "We know you're in there." The voice on the other side was cold, calculated, and Liam knew immediately it wasn't just a simple knock for a rescue or help. It was a demand. They were coming for Axel. Liam didn't hesitate any longer. He flung the door open, standing tall with the shotgun raised, ready for whatever came next. The moment the door creaked, Axel moved forward, his growl deepening, and Liam felt the surge of adrenaline take over. He wasn't about to back down now. "Liam Parker," the voice said, now clearly coming from the man standing just outside. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, with a military-style demeanor, a man who had seen far too much. "You need to step aside. Axel belongs to us." Liam didn't move. His finger was on the trigger, but his eyes never left the man standing in front of him. "No," Liam said firmly. "Axel is not yours. You don't get to take him back." The man sighed, stepping closer. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Axel's involvement in operations that require discretion." The man paused, his words laced with disdain. "You wouldn't understand." Liam's voice was steady, but resolute. "I don't need to understand. I rescued him, and he's staying with me. If you have a problem with that, you'll have to go through me." For a moment, the man didn't respond. His eyes narrowed, assessing the situation, weighing the options. Axel stood beside Liam, unwavering. The dog's eyes locked onto the man's with an intensity that mirrored Liam's own defiance. Axel wasn't afraid, and neither was Liam. "You can't just take a dog like this and expect no consequences," the man said, his tone shifting slightly, revealing a hint of uncertainty. But then, he shook his head, his posture firming again. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice, Liam." But Liam knew he couldn't back down. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about everything Axel had gone through, everything he had survived. He wasn't going to let anyone take him away now. Without warning, the man reached into his jacket, pulling something out, a badge. Liam's hand tightened around the shotgun, but before he could react, the man spoke again. "We've been tracking Axel for weeks, and now he's with you." His eyes flicked toward the dog, a mix of suspicion and grudging respect. "We need him back, Liam. You don't know the full extent of what's been done." Liam took a step forward, his eyes locked onto the man's. "I don't care what kind of operations you're involved in. Axel belongs here, with me." The silence stretched for a long moment, the tension hanging in the air like an electric charge. Finally, the man stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. "You don't understand," he said softly, almost regretfully. But we won't give up, Liam. With that, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Liam's heart was still racing, but Axel was safe, at least for now. Liam closed the door with a heavy breath, his mind spinning. It wasn't over, but they had won this round. And Axel was staying with him. Liam turned to the dog, his body relaxing as he dropped the shotgun to his side. Axel was still standing by the door, his body tense, but his eyes now soft. They locked gazes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Liam smiled. "You're safe, buddy," he said softly, kneeling down beside him. "They're gone." Axel lowered his head into Liam's hands, and for the first time in a long time, the two of them simply sat there together, finding peace in each other's company. The fight wasn't over, but Liam knew one thing for sure. He would protect Axel no matter what, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because Axel wasn't just any dog, he was Liam's dog, and no one would ever take him again. Liam and Axel's journey was one of survival, trust, and unbreakable bond. From the moment they found each other, their lives were changed forever. Axel was no longer just a dog. He was family. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with others who believe in second chances and the power of loyalty. Let us know what you think in the comments. Your support means the world.